Congressman Paul, would you say that again? Would you use that phrase again?
Yeah, I think people who don't serve when they could and they get 3 or 4 or even 5 deferments aren't they right to send our kids off to war and not even against the wars that we have. I'm trying to stop the wars, but at least, I went when they called me up. But, the veterans problem is a big one. We have hundreds of thousands coming back from these wars that were undeclared, they were unnecessary, they haven't been won, they're unwinnable. We have hundreds of thousands looking for care. And we have an epidemic of suicide coming back. And so many have, if you add up all the contractors and all the wars going on in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we've lost 8,500 Americans and severe injuries over 40,000. And these are undeclared wars. So Rick keeps saying you don't want this libertarian stuff, but what I'm talking about, I don't bring up the word, you do, but I talk about the Constitution. Constitution has rules, and I don't like it when we send our kids off to fight these wars, and when those individuals didn't go themselves, and then come up and when they're asked, they say, oh, I don't think one person could have made a difference. I have a pet peeve that annoys me to a great deal, because when I see these young men coming back, my heart weeps for them.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, Dr. Paul has a long history of saying things that are inaccurate and false. The fact is, I never asked for deferment. I was married with a child. It was never a question. My father was, in fact, serving in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta at the time he's referring to. I think I have a pretty good idea of what it's like as a family to worry about your father getting killed, and I personally resent the kind of comments and aspersions he routinely makes without accurate information and then just slurs people with.
I need one quick follow-up. When I was drafting, I was married and had 2 kids, and I went.
I wasn't eligible for the draft. I wasn't eligible for the draft.
Congressman Paul, while we're on the subject, though, the Speaker has said that you've had a history of inaccurate statements. There has been quite a bit of controversy over this newsletter that went out under your name. A number of comments that were perceived as racist, as inaccurate. You've said that even though they were written under your name, that you didn't necessarily know they were written, you don't necessarily stand by them. Can you really take the time now and explain to everybody what happened there, how it was possible that those kind of comments went out under your name without you knowing about it?
It's been explained many times, and there were things written 20 years ago approximately that I did not write. So concentrating on something that was written 20 years ago that I didn't write, is diverting the attention from most of the important issues. But the inference is obvious that, and you even bring up the word racial overtones. More importantly, you ought to ask me what my relationship is for racial relationships. And one of my heroes is Martin Luther King, because he practiced the libertarian principle of peaceful resistance and peaceful civil disobedience, as did Rosa Parks did. But also, I'm the only one up here and the only one in the Democratic Party that understands true racism in this country. It's in the judicial system, and it has to do with enforcing the drug laws. Look at the percentages. The percentage of people who use drugs are about the same with blacks and whites, and yet the blacks are arrested way disproportionately. They're prosecuted in prison way disproportionately. They get the death penalty way disproportionately. How many times have you seen a white rich person get the electric chair or get execution? But poor minorities have an injustice, and they have an injustice in war as well, because the minorities suffer more. Even with a draft, they suffer definitely more, and without a draft, they're suffering disproportionately. If we truly want to be concerned about racism, you ought to look at a few of those issues and look at the drug laws, which are being so unfairly enforced.
We want to thank you for the first round of this debate, and we want to take a break right now. And when we come back, there's so many family issues of gay rights that have been front and center in this campaign. We'd love to have you address some of those. Again, thank you for being with us. This is the 2012 debate at St. Anselm.
You're watching live ABC News coverage of the New Hampshire Republican Party debate. Live from St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, Once again, Diane Sawyer, George Stephanopoulos, and WMUR-TV's Josh McKelvin.
Back in Manchester, Governor Romney, I want to go straight to you. Senator Santorum has been very clear in his belief that the Supreme Court was wrong when it decided that a right to privacy was embedded in the Constitution. And following from that, he believes that states have the right to ban contraception. Now, I should add that he said he's not recommending that states do that. Well, I'll be clear. Okay? Absolutely, I'm giving you your due.
We're talking about 10th Amendment and the right of states
to act. But I do want to get to that core question. Governor Romney, do you believe that states have the right to ban contraception, or is that trumped by a constitutional right to privacy?
George, this is an unusual topic that you're raising. States have a right to ban contraception. I can't imagine a state banning contraception. I can't imagine the circumstances where a state would want to do so. And if I were a governor of a state or a legislator of a state, I would totally and completely oppose any effort to ban contraception. So you're asking, given the fact that there's no state that wants to do so, and I don't know of any candidate that wants to do so, you're asking, could it constitutionally be done? We can ask our constitutionalist here.
I'm sure Congressman Paul.
Okay, come on
I'm
back.
Asking you, do you believe that states have that right or not?
George, I don't know whether the state has a right to ban contraception. No state wants to. I mean, the idea of you putting forward things that states might want to do that no state wants to do and asking me whether they could do it or not is kind of a silly thing, I think.
Governor, Hold on a second. Governor, you went to Harvard Law School. You know very well
has the Supreme Court decided that the states do not have the right to provide contraception?
Yes, they have.
Oh, in
1965, Griswold v. Connecticut.
I believe that the law of the land is as spoken by the Supreme Court, and that if we disagree with the Supreme Court, and occasionally I do, then we have a process under the Constitution to change that decision, and it's known as the amendment process. And where we have, for instance, right now, we're having issues that relate to same-sex marriage. My view is we should have a federal amendment of the Constitution defining marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman. But I know of no reason to talk about contraceptions.
But you accept the Supreme Court decision finding a right to privacy in the Constitution?
I don't believe they decided that correctly. In my view, Roe v. Wade was improperly decided. It was based upon that same principle. And in my view, if we had justices like Roberts, Alito, Thomas, and Scalia, and more justices like that, they might well decide to return this issue to states as opposed to saying it's in the federal Constitution. And by the way, if the people say it should be in the federal Constitution, then instead of having unelected judges stuff it in there when it's not there, we should allow the people to express their own views through amendment and add it to the Constitution. But this idea that justices...
So should that be done in this case?
Pardon?
Should that be done in this case?
Should this be done in this case to allow states to ban contraception? No, states don't want to ban contraception. So why would we try and put it in the Constitution? With regards to gay marriage, I told you that's when I would amend the Constitution. Contraception, it's working just fine. Just leave it alone.
George. I understand that, but you've given two answers to the question. Do you believe that the Supreme Court should overturn it or not?
Do I believe the Supreme Court should overturn? Do I believe the Supreme Court should overturn Roe v. Wade? Yes, I do.
He mentioned my name.
Go ahead.
I didn't know whether I got time when it was favorable or not. But thank you. No, I think the Fourth Amendment is very clear. It's explicit in our privacy. You can't go into anybody's house and look at what they have or their papers or any private things without a search warrant. This is why the Patriot Act is wrong, because you have a right of privacy by the Fourth Amendment. As far as selling contraceptives, the Interstate Commerce Clause protects this because the Interstate Commerce Clause was originally written not to impede trade between the states, but it was written to facilitate trade between the states. So if it's not illegal to import birth control pills from one state to the next, it would be legal to sell birth control pills in that state.
Senator Santorum?
What's the question?
The question they're on the right to privacy and the response to Congressman Paul.
Well, Congressman Paul is talking about privacy rights under the Fourth Amendment, which I agree with him in. I don't necessarily agree that the Patriot Act violates that, but I do agree with, obviously, we have a right to privacy under the Fourth Amendment, but that's not what the Griswold decision nor the Roe v. Wade decision were about. They created through a penumbra of rights a new right to privacy that was not in the Constitution. And that's, again, as I sort of agree with Governor Romney's assessment, legal assessment. It created a right through bootstrapping, through creating something that wasn't there. I believe it should be overturned. I am for overturning Roe versus Wade. I do not believe that that we have a right in this country, in the Constitution, to take a human life. I don't think our founders envisioned that. I don't think the writing of the Constitution in anywhere enables that.
I want to turn now, if I can, from the constitutional and the elevated here to something closer to home and to maybe families sitting in their living rooms all across this country. Yahoo sends us questions, as you know. We have them from real viewers. And I'd like to post one because it is about gay marriage, but at the level, and I would really love to be able to ask you what you would say personally sitting in your living rooms to the people who ask questions like this. This is from Phil in Virginia. Given that you oppose gay marriage, what do you want gay people to do who want to form loving, committed, long-term relationships? What is your solution? And Speaker Gingrich?
Well, I think what I would say is that we want to make it possible to have those things that are most intimately human between friends occur. For example, you're in a hospital. If there are visitation hours, should you be allowed to stay there? There ought to be ways to designate that. You want to have somebody in your will. There ought to be ways to designate that. But it is a huge jump from being understanding and considerate and concerned, which we should be, to saying we're therefore going to institute the sacrament of marriage as though it has no basis. The sacrament of marriage was based on a man and woman, has been for 3,000 years, is at the core of our civilization, and is something worth protecting and upholding. And I think protecting and upholding that doesn't mean that you have to go out and make life miserable for others, but it does mean you make a distinction between a historic sacrament of enormous importance in our civilization and simply deciding it applies everywhere and it's just a civil right. It's not. It is a part of how we define ourselves, and I think that a marriage between a man and a woman is part of that definition.
Governor Huntsman, you have talked about civil unions. How do you disagree with the others on this stage?
Well, personally, I think civil unions are fair. I support them. I think there's such a thing as equality under the law. I'm a married man. I've been married for 28 years. I have 7 kids. Glad we're off the contraception discussion. 15 minutes worth, by the way. And I don't feel that my relationship is at all threatened by civil unions. On marriage, I'm a traditionalist. I think that ought to be saved for one man and one woman. But I believe that civil unions are fair. And I think it brings a level of dignity to relationships. And I believe in reciprocal beneficiary rights. I think they should be part of civil unions as well. And states ought to be able to talk about this. I think it's I think it's absolutely appropriate.